Thank you very much, Ram. Good afternoon, everyone. And I would like to request the chairperson to give me time, basically allow me at 10th minute, not at the 12th minute. It's like cancer patient being told by the doctor that you have only 2 weeks left. So, if possible, to give me the alarm at 10th minute, so I have time to wrap up rather than 12th minute. Yeah, thank you very much for accepting this. I think I have limited time, so I won't go into other, I'll directly hit the nail. Basically, so far we have been discussing about GNH of business. Actually, I'm looking for GNH of business from a very different perspective than it has been actually considered so far. For me, the GNH in businesses should be looked from more macro level perspective than micro level perspective. And source of happiness, let me come to the source of happiness. And one single and very important mantra of being happy at a household level is to keep your wives happy. If they are happy, then it transmits, happiness transmits to everyone. I think this simple mantra has to be applied at a macro level. And this is it. This is very important, very powerful message from Mahanaz Afakami. She says, women's status in a society has become the standard by which humanity's progress towards civility and peace can be measured. Let's add one more thing here, and that's say happiness can be measured. So I think that's, probably she talked about civility and peace, I'll add happiness also here. So women's empowerment is a very important issue. Way back in 1990s, in 1991 to be precise, Amartya Sen wrote an article in New York Book Review, and that article was named like, we have almost 100 million women lost. What did it communicate? It communicated that because of sex ratio difference between sex ratio, that's basically women are always at the lower end. And it used to be 928 at the, basically in South Asian countries and other countries. And because of that, he found that almost 100 million women were not born which should have born. And that was communicated that how difficult situation the female were facing. And that required empowerment. And where I'm making the point from here is that women empowerment is a key to happiness of national, and what business should be doing, I'm coming to that for that. Very interesting thing again, when you look at this whole issue of women empowerment, and this is basically, I want to say is that happiness of other half matters very significantly. What we should be doing for this other half. Now, what happened after Amartya Sen wrote an article, there was a lot of effort has been taken for women empowerment, education, and other things, but what is lagging behind? And this whole missing 100 million women should be looked from a different perspective. And the perspective is, they are missing from the labor market. And that's where I'm taking my focus, is from missing 100 million women, not at the birth, but at the labor market. And what has happened in the labor market, I'll show some of the things. This is missing women from the labor market. There are 4 important things that actually you can note here. One is systematic denial from the equal access to job. I think that is very happening everywhere, including Bhutan. And then their concentration in low productive activities. They are working, even if they are working, they are more concentrated in low productive jobs. Third problem, which is also related to the second problem, is called wage discrimination. There's a very high wage disparity. International Labour Organization did a study in 2007, which is called Working Women Trends 2016. What does it say? Is that the gap between the wage of male and female is about 77%. So female are earning 77% less than the male on a global level. And it would take 70 years to bridge this gap. Can we wait for 70 years to make our women folk happy? I think that is too long time period to wait for that. We have to take some strong action today. And that's basically, and then finally, which I'm not touching, but it's a very important issue, is called sexual violence and exploitation at workplaces. Now this is, if you look at this element, it shows the labor force participation rate, actually gender gaps in the labor force participation rate. And my focus right now is this. You look at the South Asia, it's here. What does it communicate? That in South Asia, labor force participation rate for female is about 55 percentage point less than the male, actually. This is very significant, and it has gone up in 2015 compared to 1995. So South Asia, where we are living, the situation is far worse than anything. And in Bhutan also, the situation is more or less same. Now, let me turn to another element here. And this is employment to population ratio for basically, and you look at the male here, at the global level, this is male and this is female, which is, female are employed less than the male. But South Asia, the male are working more, the employment for male is more, and employment for the female has gone down, the distance has become double of at the global level. So South Asia is lagging behind. We are part of South Asia here. Then, look at this part. And I want to focus here again. This is 20%. This is women as employees. Only 20% of the female are working as employees in non-agricultural paid activities. Most of them are working as family unpaid laborers. And that's basically, and it takes me to yesterday when UN regional representative talked about that the time has come when at least 8% of the women should find place in the higher level CEO position, executive level positions. But for me, that is like constructing the third floor when the first floor is not existing. I think what we have to do is that we have to first take them to employment, then we can think of taking them up at the higher level, which is basically the first floor is missing itself. Now, how I link the whole issue with, because my topic is export, female employment, and productivity. Now, trade. You look at how economic growth has taken place in this graph you must have seen in the earlier presentation today. And this is basically how growth rates have picked up after 1990. It's very significant. Basically, that line moves up significantly and becomes very steep after 1990s. And that is, in the basically after 1990s, the GDP has grown much faster than it has grown any time in the world history in the past. And that is contributed by two factors. One is trade, which you can see the lower line, which is how the trade has grown in the past, basically since 1990s. And the second factor is technology. So two things have driven the growth post-1990s, actually post-liberalization period. One is trade and the second is technology. They have driven the growth. How we have benefited, how women have benefited from this, and how trade contribute to female employment is a very important thing to learn from. And my paper basically look at how because one of the important element of trade with which country benefit is exports. So how export orientation creates employment opportunity for female, and which is very, I think, well researched, but only problem is it requires country-specific research. You can't actually tackle the firm-specific factors which actually enter into a greater play and determine female employment, cannot be captured through macro-level data or cross-country data. It requires country-specific, intra-country data. So we need to look more for micro data than macro data. My friend was talking about that when he was making a presentation. Now, the big question is that, how has the expanding trade, especially exports, have addressed the gender issues in the labor market? So what I've done, basically I've taken basically cross-sectional data from Bhutanese big scale, large scale, and medium scale industries, which basically are 41. Out of 68, I've captured 41 large scale and medium scale industries. And what I'm basically looking for two issues. One, not only gender employment intensity, which I call basically is a ratio of total female employees as a ratio of total labor force in a particular firm. I call it female employment intensity. And the second thing is productivity of labor. It's not being employed, but how productive they are. Does it make difference in their productivity levels, or gender productivity differences what kind of gender productive differences are there? Important to fathom that. So for that, basically, this is the major thing. And I've actually used 41 industries, surveyed in 2000, basically baseline for survey was 2016. Now, what is the relationship between exports, female employment? As I said, there's no uniform relationship. One set of study communicates that as export intensity increases, female employment intensity also increases. So as export intensity of a firm increases, you'll find more female employment take place. This is one set of information. But there are contradictory empirical evidence also, which communicate that export orientation increases or export intensity increases, female employment intensity tends to decline. How this contradiction can be explained? This requires basically a in-depth understanding of the factors that contribute to female employment. And the conceptual framework for that can be drawn from Heckscher-Ohlin model, which decides that comparative cost advantage are derived by how the abundant factors are intensively used in the production processes. And that determines the comparative cost advantage. So in the cases...
10 minutes already.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So in the cases when the comparative cost advantage based on the product which we are competing in foreign countries, which requires cheaper labor, low skill products, then we require more labor and then more female employment take place. The case of ready-made garment industries in Bangladesh is a very representative case that why they are used more intensively because it is low skill employment where the technology is more labor intensive. So first factor I look at is the technological choices, the level of competition, and this level of competition has to be understood from Gary Baker's 1954 work, which is basically one of the important work in discrimination called Economics of Discrimination. And he says the firms have taste for discrimination and they discriminate on the basis of their historical and social perceptions. But once this discrimination affects their profit, they have to change their way of doing the things. So as competition would increase, they'll have to stop discriminating or they discriminate at the expense of their profit. The third thing is the impact of foreign culture, which enters through FDI, because foreign culture sometimes brings a new set of mentality and they employ more foreign labor, female labor. That's most of the empirical evidence suggests. Another factor that is called age of the firm. Older firms are more resistant to change. Newer firms are less resistant to change. And another factor, basically, I use dummy for them, basically, and it's called whether the ownership is with the state or with the private sector, or ownership is with the female-headed CEO or male-headed CEO. First, look at this export intensity. The first column is basically what I have done is that I have divided the industry into classification based on Isaac classification, 2-digit classification system. And then we have 7 kind of group of industries. And the second column reflects export intensity, and the third column reflects female employment intensity. And then we can find that generally the export-oriented industries' female employment intensity is less. How does it translate into? Then I run regression model, and the regression model is basically this, and the finding of regression model is this, where dummy variables, both it says that the ownership, whether with the state or with the private sector or female CEO or male CEO is not very significant relationship. But all these others have been found to be very, very significant. Export is negatively associated with female employment intensity. Technical coefficient, that is labor to capital ratio, as labor to capital ratio increases, more female are employed. Age of the firm, older the firms, they tend to employ more female labor. It requires an explanation in Bhutanese context because older firms have always followed more labor intensive technology where females have been employed. And share of foreign direct investment, the companies which are exporting and which have actually owned by foreign, basically stakeholders, the female employment intensity increases. This is one. But I wanted to also look at the difference in the productivity of male and female labor. So I run Cobb-Douglas production function, modified form. And what I found is that you can look at the coefficient of basically female, and you find that female coefficient is 0.081, and the male is basically look at 0.807. So female productivity is far less than the male productivity. It means not only female are engaged less in productive activities, they are less engaged in, or they are not only employed less, but also their productivity is also very less. And that's very alarming scenario for Bhutan, I think. When we try to promote happiness, we have to address this issue. And then I wanted to check whether there's a significant difference. There's a difference between the female employment intensity and the productivity of female in the export-oriented industries and non-export-oriented industries, which we call domestic market-oriented industries. So I'd done a case-wise diagnostic for when export orientation is more than 0.5, it is basically export-oriented industries. And when the EI ratio is less than 0.5, they are domestic market-oriented firms. And what we find that export-oriented industries, female are more productively engaged than the non-export-oriented industries. So that basically communicates that in the export-oriented industries, though female are employed less, but their productivity is large. But in the domestic market-oriented firms, females are more employed, but their productivity is less. This is what I call typical catch-22 situation.
1 minute.
Yeah, and this is this, and I want to implication. I will straight away jump to the, basically, the conclusion aspect. GNH for business. What we have to learn from here? The firm have to overcome the taste for discrimination. I think that's very, very important. We don't hire female labor, and because female employment intensity is low in both the cases, productivity of female is also lower in both the cases, so firm have to drop the taste for discrimination. I think this is one of the lessons for GNH of business in Bhutan is that one. Second, employ female labor more in skill capital intensive process and give them better use, better technology. I think once the firms are able to do that, they are going to deliver more on happiness than anything else. This is my paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you.